My name is Eleanor Vance. For 71 years, I have called the coastal town of Port Blossom home. My life, much like the town itself, has been shaped by the rhythm of the tides and the steadfastness of the old colonial houses that line our cobbled streets. For 47 of those years, I was married to Arthur Vance, a man as solid and dependable as the granite foundations he laid for the homes his company, Vance and Sons Construction, built throughout the county. Arthur wasn't a man of grand pronouncements, but of quiet, enduring actions. He taught me that true strength isn't about raising your voice, but about holding your ground. Since he passed 3 years ago, I've tried to live by that principle, finding a quiet rhythm in my days, tending the garden he loved, and maintaining the federal-style house on Chestnut Street where we raised our 2 sons, Liam and Daniel. Life had settled into a gentle, predictable current, punctuated by the twice-weekly visits of my elder son, Liam, his wife, Chloe, and my 2 grandchildren. I thought this was the shape of my remaining years, a peaceful tide carrying me softly forward. I never imagined a storm was gathering just beneath the placid surface, a storm that would threaten to pull me under. The first tremor came on a Tuesday afternoon over tea in my dining room. The late autumn sun slanted through the tall windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and the faint steam rising from our porcelain cups. You just don't appreciate the complexities of modern estate planning, Eleanor, Chloe sighed, her voice a practiced blend of patience and condescension. Her nails, a perfect, glossy crimson, tapped a soft rhythm against the polished mahogany of the dining table Arthur's grandfather had built. Arthur would have wanted Liam and me to ensure his assets are managed for maximum growth. It's about securing the family's future. I stared at her across the table, my hands, suddenly feeling their age, trembling slightly around my teacup. At 71, I had weathered grief, illness, and the countless small heartbreaks of a long life. But the look in Chloe's eyes, as if I were a charming but slightly confused child who couldn't be trusted with her own affairs, stirred a slow, unfamiliar heat in my veins. I was married to Arthur for 47 years, I said, my voice quieter than I intended, yet firm. I believe I have a very clear understanding of what he wanted. Chloe's smile, always perfectly in place, tightened at the corners. Beside her, Liam shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere over my shoulder. He was silent, as he so often was when his wife steered the conversation toward money. The tension in the room grew heavy, suffocating the warm, familiar scent of lemon and Earl Grey. "We just want what's best for everyone, Mom," Liam finally murmured, his eyes flicking to mine for a brief, apologetic second before skittering away. "The conversation is over," I replied, placing my cup back in its saucer with a soft clink. I rose from my chair, my joints protesting slightly. "I need to respond to an email from the Historical Society. May I borrow your laptop for a moment, Chloe?" I saw a flash of something in her eyes, not just surprise, but a flicker of pure alarm, before her polished composure snapped back into place. "Of course, Eleanor. It's in the study." The study had once been Arthur's sanctuary, smelling of old books, pipe tobacco, and wood polish. Now it was Chloe's domain when she visited, filled with her pastel decorative pillows and cloying, vanilla-scented candles. I sat at Arthur's old desk, the worn leather of the chair cool against my back, and opened the sleek silver laptop. I was surprised to find it unlocked and awake. That wasn't like meticulous, security-conscious Chloe. I opened a new browser window to log into my email account, and that's when I saw them. The row of tabs she had left open at the top of the screen. My fingers, poised over the keyboard, froze. My heart gave a painful lurch. Seaside Serenity Senior Living, our community and care options, Harbor View Assisted Living, pricing and floor plans, navigating difficult conversations, moving a parent to a care facility. I clicked through them, one by one, a cold dread seeping into my bones. Each tab was a window into a future I hadn't known was being planned for me. Price lists, amenities packages, photos of smiling, silver-haired residents engaged in watercolor classes and chair yoga. My breath hitched. With a trembling hand, I clicked on her browser history. The list was long and terrifyingly specific. Early signs of cognitive decline in elderly, legal steps for power of attorney, Massachusetts elder guardianship process, how to protect assets from nursing home costs. The screen blurred as hot, angry tears filled my eyes. I, who had helped Liam and Chloe with the down payment on their sprawling house in the suburbs. I, who had co-signed the loan and for the last 7 years had sent them a check for $2,250 every single month to help with the mortgage. I, who watched their children, Emma and Tyler, every Tuesday and Thursday so Chloe could have her personal time for yoga and lunches with friends. I had never asked for anything in return, never complained, never interfered. I had done it all out of love, believing I was weaving a strong, supportive net for my family. My gaze fell on an email confirmation, open in another tab. My heart hammered against my ribs. Appointments. Scheduled for next week, during the time I was supposed to be visiting my sister in Vermont. They were going to tour the places they planned to put me, without me. Footsteps padded on the runner in the hall. I quickly clicked back to my email login page, my hands shaking so badly I could barely control the mouse. Finding everything okay? Chloe's voice, honey-sweet and utterly false, drifted from the doorway. Yes, just fine, I managed to say. I was amazed at the steadiness of my own voice, a calm island in the screaming chaos of my mind. She lingered, leaning against the doorframe, watching me. You know, Eleanor, we've been thinking a lot about your living situation lately. This big house, all by yourself, all these stairs. It must be a lot for you to handle. I managed just fine, I said, keeping my eyes on the screen. The evidence of her betrayal was still there, lurking just a click away, a digital serpent in her technological garden. Well, Liam and I were just thinking, it might be nice for you to be in a community. With people your own age, you know? With activities and care available if you should ever need it. I turned then, meeting her gaze. I kept my face a careful, placid blank. That's a very thoughtful thing to consider, Chloe. I'll keep it in mind. Later that night, long after they had gone, the silence in the house was a palpable weight. This home, which had always felt like a warm embrace, now felt vast and hollow, its familiar shadows seeming to hold new, unsettling secrets. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had helped my sons with their homework, and listened to Arthur's quiet recounting of his day. In front of me was my checkbook and a stamped envelope addressed to Liam and Chloe. Inside was the mortgage check for $2,250, a payment I had never missed in 84 months. I stared at the envelope, my mind replaying the images from Chloe's laptop, the glossy brochures for Seaside Serenity, the cold, clinical search terms about my supposed decline. I had been financing my own obsolescence. I had been paying for the privilege of being managed, assessed, and ultimately discarded. With a resolve that felt cold and sharp as ice, I picked up the telephone and dialed my bank. Hello, I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. I'd like to place a stop payment on a check. After I gave the details and hung up, I looked around my kitchen. The copper pots hanging by the stove, polished to a warm gleam. The worn spot on the linoleum floor where Arthur always stood to make his morning coffee. The house didn't feel like a betrayal anymore. It felt like a fortress. My fortress. I went to the heavy oak filing cabinet in the study and pulled out the thick folders containing Arthur's will, our insurance policies, the deed to the house, and all our financial statements. It was time to stop being the gentle, trusting matriarch and start being the woman who had helped her husband build a business from the ground up. Chloe and Liam thought they were dealing with a forgetful old woman. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I was Eleanor Vance, Arthur Vance's widow. And Arthur had not built his legacy by being a fool, nor had he married one. I spread the papers across the kitchen table, put on my reading glasses, and under the warm glow of the overhead light, I got to work. The shock was receding, replaced by a crystalline, cold determination. They wanted to put me away? They would soon learn that this old woman still had a few foundations of her own to protect. 3 days passed in a strange, suspended quiet. I spent them in my garden, a place that had always been my solace. The roses Arthur and I had planted 15 years ago were preparing for their winter sleep, and I moved among them, carefully pruning the deadwood, my hands finding a familiar, calming rhythm in the work. It was there, amidst the thorny canes and the last, defiant crimson blooms, that my phone rang. Liam's name flashed on the screen. I set my pruning shears on the stone bench and answered. "Hello, Liam." "Mom," his voice was tight, strained. There seems to be a problem with the mortgage check. The bank called and said payment was stopped." I carefully pulled off my mud-caked gardening gloves, finger by finger. "Is that right? Did you cancel it?" The disbelief in his voice was so thick it was almost comical. "I did," I said, my tone as matter-of-fact as if I were discussing the weather. "I've been reviewing my finances." A long silence stretched across the line. I could almost hear the frantic, silent gesturing I was sure Chloe was making in the background. "Mom, we were counting on that. You know that. It's our agreement." "I'm aware of the arrangement we had," I replied, my gaze falling on a sturdy, deep-rooted rose bush. "But circumstances change, Liam. I've come to realize I need to be more prudent with my money. For my future care, you understand." Another silence, this one heavier, freighted with dawning comprehension. "What is that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm 71 years old, Liam. And according to some, it's high time I started planning for my eventual placement in a care facility." The sharp, surprised intake of breath on his end of the line was my answer. It told me everything I needed to know. Can we talk about this?" "In person?" he finally asked, his voice strained. "Of course," I said. "Why don't you and Chloe come for dinner tomorrow night? Say, around 7. After hanging up, I returned to my roses, a deep, profound calm settling over me. For the first time since my discovery on Chloe's laptop, I felt the ground firm beneath my feet. I was no longer a victim of their secret plans. I was the architect of what came next. The following evening, I prepared Arthur's famous pot roast, the rich, savory aroma filling the house with a ghost of happier times. While it simmered, I went into the dining room. I laid out the financial statements on the table, bank records showing the 72 identical transfers for their mortgage, copies of the checks for the down payment, the statements for the grandchildren's college funds that I had started and contributed to every year. Then, I carefully covered the damning paper trail with my best lace tablecloth. Everything was ready. Chloe arrived first, her smile as brittle as a frozen leaf. She thrust a bouquet of stiff, store-bought lilies at me. "Eleanor, you look wonderful." "We've been so worried." "Have you?" I said, taking the flowers. I noticed her eyes darting around the living room, assessing, calculating. "Worried about what, precisely, Chloe?" Before she could formulate a reply, Liam walked in, looking as uncomfortable as a boy in a new suit. He gave me a brief, stiff hug. "Something smells incredible, Mom." "Arthur's pot roast," I said, watching Chloe's expression sour slightly at the mention of my late husband's name. For years, she had made subtle digs about Arthur, implying he'd been too conservative with his investments, that he'd missed opportunities, little erosions of his memory that I had foolishly let slide for the sake of keeping the peace. Dinner was a masterclass in superficiality. We talked about the weather, the grandchildren's school activities, the upcoming town council election. Finally, Chloe set her fork down with a delicate clatter and fixed me with her signature, deeply concerned, expression. "Eleanor, about the check. Liam and I are just so confused. You've always been the soul of reliability." I took a slow sip of water, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment. "Tell me something, Chloe. When you use my computer, do you usually forget to close your browser tabs?" Her face went utterly still, a porcelain mask of shock. Beside her, Liam looked from her to me, his brow furrowed in confusion. "What tabs?" he asked. "What are you talking about?" The ones about seaside serenity, I said calmly. And Harbor View. And the appointments you scheduled for next week while I was supposed to be in Vermont. A blotchy, unattractive flush crept up Chloe's neck. I was just doing some research, she stammered, her composure beginning to crack. Just looking ahead. Research? I echoed, letting the word hang in the air between us. Mom, what is this? Liam turned to his wife. What appointments? Chloe recovered quickly, her hand flying to Liam's arm, clutching it. I was looking into options, darling, that's all. For the future. Your mother has been so forgetful lately, and this big house, it's just entirely too much for one person. Forgetful. I raised an eyebrow. That's an interesting assessment. What exactly have I forgotten, Chloe? She blinked rapidly, flustered. Well, just the other day you couldn't find your reading glasses. And they were on top of my head, I finished for her. A classic cliché, perhaps, but hardly a symptom of dementia. No one said anything about dementia. Chloe snapped, then immediately softened her tone, a transparent shift back to her concerned persona. I'm just worried about you, Eleanor. All alone in this big place. I turned my full attention to my son. Liam, did you know that your wife has been researching nursing homes for me? His discomfort was a palpable thing in the room. He squirmed in his chair. We may have discussed options. For down the road. Down the road, I repeated softly. And were you planning to include me in these discussions? About my own life. Of course, Mom, he said quickly, but his eyes slid away from mine, unable to hold my gaze. With deliberate slowness, I stood and walked to the head of the table. I took a corner of the lace tablecloth between my thumb and forefinger. Let's talk about why I stopped payment on that check, I said, my voice even. Let's talk about what I've been contributing to this family and what I've been getting in return. With a flick of my wrist, I pulled the tablecloth away, revealing the neat stacks of financial documents beneath. Chloe gasped, her eyes widening in horror as she took in the years of evidence laid bare on the mahogany. Eleanor, this is completely unnecessary, she began, but I held up a hand, silencing her. On the contrary, Chloe, it is entirely necessary. Because I need to understand something. I looked directly at my son, my heart aching with the question I had to ask. I need to understand if my own son, my firstborn, was complicit in a plan to have me put away so that you could more easily access what's left of your father's money. Liam's face crumpled. Mom, no. It's not like that. But his voice trailed off, and in his eyes, I saw the one thing I had dreaded seeing, the deep, unmistakable stain of guilt. And I knew that whatever the specifics of Chloe's scheme, my son had known enough. He had stood by and let it happen. The silence that descended upon the dining room was absolute. Outside, a light rain began to fall, tapping against the window panes like impatient fingers. The pot roast, Arthur's favorite, sat half-eaten on our plates, growing cold. This is ridiculous, Chloe said, her voice sharp as she pushed her chair back from the table with a grating screech. You're twisting everything, Eleanor. Liam looked between us, his face pale and drawn. Mom, Chloe was just trying to be prepared, to plan ahead for you. By scheduling secret tours of facilities behind my back? I kept my voice steady, a remarkable feat considering the tremor in my heart. By researching how to have me declared mentally unfit? Chloe's eyes widened in genuine shock. I saw your search history, Chloe, I stated flatly. I turned my gaze back to Liam. Did you know about that part of her research? The part about legal guardianship. Liam's expression shifted from defensive to baffled. What? Your wife, I explained, watching the truth dawn on my son's face with a slow, sickening horror, has been researching the legal process for taking control of my life and my finances. Apparently, I'm not just old and forgetful, I'm incompetent. Chloe's carefully constructed composure finally shattered. You had no right to go through my private history, she shrieked. And you had no right to plot the course of my final years without my knowledge or consent, I countered, my voice dangerously soft. Liam stood up, running a hand through his hair in a gesture so like his father's it made my heart ache. Chloe, what is Mom talking about? Guardianship. Her face was flushed, her eyes darting wildly. It was just proactive research, Liam. Your mother is a master manipulator, and she is blowing this completely out of proportion. Show him, I said quietly, folding my hands on the table over the damning pile of papers. Show him your laptop. Show him the search history, the emails to the facilities, the appointments. If it's all as innocent as you claim, you shouldn't have any problem with that. Chloe let out a laugh, but it was a brittle, hollow sound. I don't have to prove a thing to either of you. This is absurd. She rounded on Liam, her voice trembling with rage. She's turning you against me. She's always been jealous of me, of our life. She resents me because I took her place. The sheer absurdity of the accusation was almost stunning. Took my place as what, Chloe? The primary woman in Liam's life? He's your husband, not mine. You've never accepted me, she cried, her composure now completely gone. You compare every single thing I do to how Arthur would have done it, or how you would have done it. You hold this house and his memory over my head like a guillotine. That simply isn't true, I said, genuinely taken aback by the venom in her voice. It is true, she insisted. And now you're punishing us, trying to turn my own husband against me, all because I dared to think about your future. Liam held up his hands, a desperate peacemaker in a war he hadn't realized was being waged. Everyone, just please calm down. I am calm, I replied. And strangely, I was. Seeing Chloe's mask disintegrate, hearing the raw greed and resentment pour out of her, was a painful but profound validation. I just want the truth. Liam turned to his wife, his voice firm for the first time that evening. Show me the laptop, Chloe. She stared at him, incredulous. You're taking her side? I'm not taking sides, he said, though it was clear a shift had occurred. I'm trying to understand what is real and what is not. Chloe's expression hardened into a mask of cold fury. Fine. You want to see it? I'll show you. She stormed out of the dining room and returned moments later, her laptop in her hand. She slammed it down on the table, flipping open the screen with a sharp, angry snap. There. Look all you want. She pushed it toward Liam. Yes, I looked into care facilities. Because your mother is 71 and this house is a burden and someone has to be the responsible adult. Liam began to scroll through the browser history, his frown deepening with every passing second. Chloe, these searches. How to prove mental incompetence. Asset protection from nursing home costs. His voice grew harder. And this email, to a place called Green Valley Estates. Mrs. Vance will not be informed of the visit at this time, as we are concerned her emotional state will make a rational assessment difficult. He looked up from the screen, his face a thundercloud. What the hell, Chloe? Her face paled. I was just being thorough. Thorough. The word came out like a strangled cough. The truth, raw and ugly, was finally out in the open. You don't understand. Chloe's voice dropped to a desperate whisper. Your mother has all this money. Arthur's money, just sitting in accounts, not doing anything, while we are struggling. We have the mortgage, the kids' college funds are barely growing. It just doesn't make any sense. The room fell silent. So there it was. The heart of it all. So this was never about my well-being, I said softly. It was about Arthur's money. That's not fair, she protested, but her voice was weak, devoid of conviction. Liam stared at his wife as if he were seeing her for the very first time. Mom has been paying half our mortgage for 7 years, he said, his voice flat. And she can afford it. Chloe snapped back. Meanwhile, we're putting off renovating the kitchen and driving a 7-year-old car while she sits on a fortune that your father left. That he left to me, I corrected her, my voice quiet but unyielding. Liam turned to me then, his expression a portrait of anguish. Mom. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about the guardianship searches, or the secret appointments, or any of that. But you knew she was planning to put me in a home, I said, not as an accusation, but as a statement of fact. He hung his head and nodded slowly. She mentioned it as a possibility. That it might be a good idea someday. But not like this. Not secretly. Not secretly? Chloe scoffed. We were going to do the legwork and present her with a wonderful, well-researched set of options. Without asking me first, I noted. Because you're stubborn, she shot back. Because you would have said no before you even listened. You don't know that, I said. Because you never gave me the dignity of asking. Liam closed the laptop with a quiet, final click. He looked at his wife, his face grim. I think, he said, his voice heavy, we all need some time. Chloe grabbed her purse from the floor. I'm going home. This was a trap, a complete ambush. Chloe, Liam began. No. I am done being the villain here. I was trying to plan for our future. For all of our futures. She marched to the front door, then paused, her hand on the knob. She looked back at me, her eyes glittering with unshed tears of rage. And Eleanor? Don't expect any more Sunday dinners from me, since we're all being so honest now. The front door slammed shut, its echo reverberating through the silent house. Liam and I sat in the echoing silence for several long moments. The aroma of the cooling pot roast seemed like a mockery. I am so sorry, Mom, he finally whispered, his voice cracking. I reached across the table, past the scattered papers of my life, and laid my hand over his. It felt small and frail. Did you really not know the extent of it, Liam? He shook his head, looking up at me, his eyes, Arthur's eyes, swimming with a shame so profound it broke my heart. Not the worst of it. But I should have. I should have been paying attention. The morning after the disastrous dinner, I woke not with a hangover of anger, but with a clarity of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I dressed with care, selecting a tailored navy suit I had often worn to board meetings when Arthur and I were running the business together. It was my armor. Instead of calling Liam for a ride, I called a taxi. First National Bank on Main Street, please, I told the driver. Inside the cool marble interior of the bank, I was led to the office of a personal banker, a sharp young woman named Melissa. How can I help you today, Mrs. Vance? She asked with a polite smile. I need a complete review of all my accounts, I said, my voice firm. And I need to make some significant changes. Over the next hour, a more detailed picture of Chloe's machinations emerged. Melissa confirmed that Chloe was listed as an authorized user on one of my credit cards, a change I had most certainly never approved. Worse, there had been multiple failed attempts over the past few months to access my investment accounts online using my personal information. This is highly irregular, Mrs. Vance, Melissa said, her professional demeanor overlaid with genuine concern. This verges on fraud. Would you like me to help you file a report? I thought for a moment. Not yet, I said. But I want to lock everything down. New passwords, new account numbers, new security questions. And I want any and all authorizations for Liam or Chloe Vance to be revoked from every single one of my accounts, effective immediately. Melissa nodded, her fingers flying across her keyboard. We can absolutely do that. We can also implement two-factor authentication and a verbal password for any in-person or telephone transactions. Give me everything you've got, I said. I left the bank an hour later feeling lighter, as if I'd shed a heavy, invisible cloak. My next stop was a law office 2 blocks over, a distinguished brick building with a brass plaque that read Walsh and Associates. Martin Walsh, a man whose wisdom was as well known in Port Blossom as his unruly white eyebrows, had been Arthur's lawyer and friend for over 30 years. Eleanor, he greeted me, his handshake as firm as it was in his 60s. It's been too long. What can I do for you? I settled into the deep leather chair across from his sprawling oak desk. Martin, I need to make some changes to my will and my power of attorney documents. His eyebrows rose. Is that so? Any particular reason for the sudden review? Yes, I said. I want to remove Liam as my executor and as my primary durable and medical power of attorney. Martin leaned back, steepling his fingers and studying me over the top of his glasses. That's a profound change, Eleanor. Are you comfortable telling me why? I told him everything. The browser history, the secret appointments, the canceled check, the ugly confrontation over dinner, the discoveries at the bank. He listened intently, his expression growing graver with each revealed detail. When I finished, he let out a long, weary sigh. I wish I could say I was shocked, Eleanor, he said. But elder financial exploitation is a quiet epidemic. And it's often the ones closest to us. He pulled a yellow legal pad toward him. All right, let's get to work. By the time I left his office that afternoon, I had a new will, new power of attorney documents, and a revocable living trust designed to shield my assets. I had named my younger son, Daniel, as my executor and power of attorney. Daniel, who lived in Colorado and who, I was beginning to realize, had been slowly and systematically edged out of our family's inner circle by Chloe's subtle manipulations. This will protect you legally, Martin said as I signed the last page. But Eleanor, what about Liam? He's still your son. Yes, he is, I said, a familiar ache blooming in my chest. And I love him, but love cannot be blind. I can't trust his judgment while Chloe has such a powerful hold on him. In the taxi on the way home, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called Daniel. Mom, he answered, his voice full of surprise. Is everything all right? Not entirely, sweetheart, I admitted, and then I gave him the abridged version of the past week's events. His reaction was swift and fierce. I'm on the next flight out. I'll be there this weekend. Daniel, you don't have to. Mom, I do, he insisted, his voice tight with anger on my behalf. I should have been paying more attention. I should have seen this coming. After we hung up, I made one more call. To Susan, my oldest and dearest friend, who lived just 3 blocks away. We had drifted apart in recent years, a drift I now saw had been skillfully encouraged by Chloe, who always had a reason why I was too busy or too tired for our weekly coffee dates. Eleanor Vance. Susan's voice boomed over the line, as warm and familiar as my own kitchen. To what do I owe this distinct pleasure? Susan, I said, my own voice suddenly thick with unshed tears. I think I could really use a friend right now. An hour later, she was sitting at my kitchen table, her face a mask of righteous fury as I finished my story. That manipulative little viper, she fumed. I never liked her, Eleanor. I always said there was something off about the way she tried to manage you, to cut you off from the rest of us. I nodded, the full picture of my isolation coming into sharp, painful focus. First, it was my friends like Susan. Then it was family, like Daniel. My world had been slowly, expertly shrunk until it consisted only of Liam and his family, a kingdom where Chloe ruled. So what's the plan now, General? Susan asked, a twinkle of her old fighting spirit in her eyes. The plan, I said, is to fortify my position. And then I wait. Wait for what? I twisted the simple gold wedding band on my finger, the one Arthur had placed there 51 years ago. For my son to find his way back to the truth. A small, determined smile touched my lips. And in the meantime, I added, I'm taking my life back. The following week was a whirlwind of reclamation. I had the locks on my house changed and a modern security system installed. I reconnected with 2 other old friends, and we made a plan to start a book club. I signed up for that watercolor class I'd always wanted to take at the Community Arts Center. I made appointments with my own doctors for a complete physical and a cognitive baseline test, creating my own official, medically certified paper trail of my perfectly sound health and mind. Just in case. Liam called a few times. Our conversations were stilted, circling the enormous, unspoken chasm that had opened between us. He never mentioned the dinner, and neither did I. This was his path to walk now. His choices to make. 2 weeks to the day after the dinner, I was in my garden, coaxing the last of the chrysanthemums to bloom, when a rental car pulled into my driveway. I straightened up, shielding my eyes against the bright afternoon sun. Daniel stepped out. He looked so much like his father, with the same kind eyes and quiet strength in his posture. Before I could even set down my trowel, he had crossed the lawn and pulled me into a fierce, protective hug. "I've missed you so much, Mom," he whispered into my hair. Over his shoulder, my heart gave a sudden, tight squeeze. Another car was pulling up behind Liam's familiar SUV. My older son got out alone. He stood by his vehicle, his expression unreadable, watching the reunion of his mother and the brother he hadn't seen in nearly 2 years. The moment had arrived, sooner than I'd expected. Standing there in my garden, the solid warmth of one son's embrace around me while the other watched from a distance, I knew with absolute certainty that whatever happened next, the Vance family would never be the same. Daniel and Liam stood facing each other across the manicured lawn of my garden, the space between them charged with 2 years of distance and a lifetime of brotherhood. "Liam." Daniel's voice was flat, his hand still resting on my shoulder in a gesture that was both supportive and proprietary. "Daniel," Liam replied, his own voice tight. "Didn't know you were coming to town. Seems to be a recurring theme in this family, doesn't it?" Daniel countered, his tone edged with ice. "People not knowing things they ought to." I squeezed Daniel's arm, a gentle appeal for peace. "Let's go inside, boys. I'll make some coffee." In the kitchen, the room that had always been the heart of our family, they sat at opposite ends of the table where I had once refereed their childhood squabbles. The silence was thick and uncomfortable as I moved about the counters, the familiar ritual of grinding beans and filling the coffee pot a welcome distraction. "So, Chloe's not with you?" Daniel asked, breaking the standoff. Liam shook his head, his gaze fixed on the wood grain of the table. "We're taking some time apart. I'm staying at a hotel." My hands stilled over the coffee pot. This was a development I hadn't expected. "Since when?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Liam let out a long, ragged sigh, raking a hand through his hair. "Since I went looking for the truth myself." He finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine. "After that dinner here." I started paying attention. Really paying attention. I looked at the credit card bills she kept in her desk. I looked through her computer, properly this time. He swallowed hard. "I found emails, Mom." Between her and a divorce attorney. They were discussing strategies for contesting Dad's will if something were to happen to you. The air left my lungs in a quiet whoosh. Arthur's will was ironclad, a simple and loving document that left everything to me, with the estate to be divided equally between our sons upon my death. There was nothing to contest. She was also. Liam's voice dropped, thick with shame. "She was intercepting some of your mail. I found a few of your bank statements, a notice from your investment advisor, all hidden in a drawer with her things." "Oh, Liam," I said softly, placing the heavy ceramic mugs on the table in front of them. "How could you have been so blind to all of this?" He shook his head, his eyes downcast again. "I wanted to believe in the life we'd built. I trusted her. And I was overwhelmed." He looked up, his expression raw. "We were in financial trouble, Mom. Serious trouble." Daniel leaned forward, his anger momentarily replaced by curiosity. "What kind of trouble?" "Debt," Liam said, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "A mountain of it. Chloe, she spends. Even with your help on the mortgage, we were drowning. I just kept thinking if I worked harder, took on more projects, I could get ahead of it." The missing pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. Chloe's desperation, her grotesque plotting, it wasn't just about greed, but about staving off a looming financial collapse of her own making. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" I asked, my heart aching for the son who had felt he had to carry such a burden alone. "Why didn't you come to me?" "Pride," he admitted quietly. "And shame. And Chloe, she convinced me that asking you for more help would just prove we were irresponsible, that we couldn't manage our own lives. She said you'd lose respect for me. So instead, she concocted a scheme to have you declared incompetent and take control of everything," Daniel finished, his voice heavy with disgust. She figured that was the only way to get her hands on the money she needed to bail herself out. Liam looked at me, his eyes pleading for understanding. I'm not defending her. What she did, what she was trying to do, it's monstrous. It's unforgivable. For the first time since this nightmare began, a fragile tendril of hope unfurled in my chest. He saw it. He finally, truly saw it. What about the children? I asked, my thoughts turning to Emma and Tyler, the innocent casualties in this war. Emma came home from college last weekend. I sat them both down and told them everything, Liam said. They had a right to know the truth. How did they take it? Daniel asked gently. Liam hesitated, a flicker of fresh pain crossing his face. They were quiet. And then Emma said she wasn't surprised. About her mother. She said they've seen how Chloe talks to you, Mom. The little comments she makes when she thinks we're not listening. The revelation was a small, sharp sting. Even my grandchildren had been more perceptive than their father. Or than me. So what happens now? I asked, looking between my two sons. Liam squared his shoulders, a flicker of the old, decisive Liam I remembered. I've retained a lawyer. For the divorce. I've also frozen our joint accounts and started the process of separating our finances. I can't live with a person I can't trust. Daniel reached across the table, his hand landing on his brother's forearm. It was the first gesture of connection between them all day. I should have been here more, he said, his gaze shifting to me. I let myself get pushed away. We all miss the signs, I said, my voice soft but firm. This isn't about placing blame. It's about figuring out how we move forward. We talked for hours that afternoon, the three of us. We talked about Arthur, about the years since his passing, about the subtle ways Chloe had sown discord and built walls between us all. As evening began to fall, Daniel suggested we go out for dinner. We went to the Salty Dog, a noisy, cheerful seafood restaurant on the wharf that had been a family favorite for decades. And there, over plates of fried clams and lobster rolls, I watched my two sons begin to rebuild the bridge between them. It was a tentative process, full of long silences and careful questions, but it was a beginning. Over a shared slice of blueberry pie, Liam cleared his throat. Mom, there's one more thing. I put my fork down, bracing myself. In her bedside table. I found Chloe's journal. He stared at his plate. She was documenting things, creating a narrative. Dozens of entries about times you were supposedly confused, or repeated yourself, or seemed disoriented. Incidents that never happened. She was building a case against you, Mom. A paper trail. A chill, colder than the November wind whipping off the harbor, snaked down my spine. A case for what? Daniel asked, his voice a low growl. For the guardianship hearing, Liam confirmed, his voice thick with shame. She was manufacturing evidence of your cognitive decline. That's not just monstrous, I said quietly, the full, diabolical scope of her plan finally revealed. That is a level of cruelty I can't even comprehend. Liam nodded, unable to speak. He had been married to that cruelty. He had been sleeping next to it every night, utterly oblivious. As we drove home, the streetlights casting long, distorted shadows on the road, I felt a fundamental shift inside me. The searing pain of the betrayal was still there, a deep and tender bruise on my soul, but it was now overlaid with a profound, unshakable clarity. I had been adrift in a fog of misplaced trust, and now, finally, the fog had lifted. In my driveway, both my sons hugged me goodbye, Daniel heading back to his hotel, Liam to his. As I stood alone on my porch, watching their separate sets of taillights disappear into the darkness, I didn't feel lonely. I felt seen. For the first time in a very long time, I felt truly, completely seen. Inside, I pulled out an old, leather-bound photo album. There were pictures of two little boys with matching crew cuts, of Arthur and me on our wedding day, of a younger, happier Liam and Chloe holding a newborn Emma. The family in those faded photographs was an illusion, a memory of something that had either never been real or had long since crumbled to dust. But perhaps, I thought, as I closed the album, something new, something more honest and resilient, could be built from the ruins. 6 months passed. The seasons turned, winter's stark branches giving way to the tender green of spring, a quiet testament to nature's relentless cycle of renewal. The divorce was finalized in December, a messy and bitter affair. Chloe fought for every penny, but Liam, guided by a shrewd lawyer, managed to protect the children's trust funds, money that had come from Arthur, a legacy she would not be allowed to touch. In the end, she got the house and a settlement that was fair but far from the windfall she had imagined. The emotional cost to everyone, however, was immeasurable. I watched my son slowly, painstakingly, rebuild his life. Liam committed himself to therapy. He and Daniel now spoke on the phone every week. He took a small, modest apartment near his office and began the long, arduous task of paying down the mountain of debt Chloe had created. We never spoke of the mortgage checks I had written for 7 years. They were a part of the past, and it was in the past they would remain. On a brilliant April morning, when the cherry trees of Port Blossom were exploding in clouds of pale pink, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Liam on the step, holding a small, potted rose bush. "It's a peace offering," he said with a small, tentative smile. "For the garden." "It's beautiful, Liam," I said, my heart swelling. I stepped aside to let him in. "Is that a Cecile Brunner?" He nodded, a flicker of pleasure in his eyes that I recognized it. "Dad always said they were your favorite." The sweetheart rose. We took it out to the back garden, which was just beginning to wake from its long winter sleep. Liam had been coming over every few weekends to help me with the heavy work, turning the soil, mending the fence, a quiet, consistent apology that spoke louder than any words. As he dug a hole for the new bush, he paused and looked at me, wiping a smear of dirt from his brow. "I saw Chloe yesterday. We met to go over the kids' summer plans." I nodded, continuing to gently loosen the roots of the small rose. "And?" "She asked about you," he said. "She asked if you were still angry with her." He shook his head slightly, a gesture of disbelief, as if this was all just some minor disagreement. "And what did you tell her?" I asked, placing the bush in the earth and tamping the soil around its base. "I told her you weren't angry," he said. "That you were too busy living your life to waste a single ounce of energy on resentment." A genuine smile touched my lips. He had been listening, after all. "It's true," I said, standing up and brushing the rich, dark earth from my hands. "I am." And I was. My days had taken on a new shape, a new texture. I had joined the board of the Port Blossom Arts Foundation, something Arthur had always said I should do. My watercolor class was now twice a week, and I had discovered, to my own surprise, a modest talent for capturing the shifting light on the harbor. My book club met on Wednesdays. My friendship with Susan and others had been rekindled, their warmth a steady comfort. Daniel and his family had visited twice, filling the house with laughter. Last Christmas, for the first time in a decade, my home had felt truly full, not with the brittle performance of family, but with the real thing. Back inside, over glasses of lemonade at the kitchen table, Liam pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. "Emma's graduation is next month," he said. "She wanted me to give you this. It was an invitation. She wants you to be there. At the ceremony, and for the dinner after." "Of course I'll be there," I said immediately. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." "Chloe will be there, too," he added, his voice laced with caution. I set down my glass and met his worried gaze. "Liam, I can be in the same room as Chloe. I am not a fragile teacup." The relief on his face was palpable. "I know, Mom. I just don't want anything to spoil Emma's day." "It won't," I assured him. "Chloe's actions have no power over me anymore." That evening, long after Liam had left, I sat on my porch swing, watching the setting sun bleed across the sky in strokes of apricot and violet. My phone chimed with a text from Susan, confirming our plans to visit the Peabody Essex Museum on Friday. A moment later, a message from my book club, reminding me it was my turn to host next week. I scrolled through my calendar, a quiet smile on my face. It was full. My life was full. The phone rang, and I saw my granddaughter's name on the screen. "Grandma?" Emma's voice was bright and clear. "Dad told me you're coming to graduation." "I'm so happy. I wouldn't miss it for anything, sweetheart." "I was hoping." She hesitated for a moment. "Would you wear Grandpa Arthur's locket? The silver one he gave you?" I want a piece of him to be there, too." Tears, warm and sweet, pricked my eyes. "Of course, my dear. Of course I will." After we hung up, I went to my jewelry box and took out the heavy silver locket Arthur had given me on our 40th anniversary. Inside were two tiny, faded photos, one of us on our wedding day, young and impossibly hopeful, and another taken just months before he died, our faces lined with love and time. I closed my hand around it, feeling its familiar weight and coolness against my palm. Arthur would have been proud. Not of any vengeful victory, but of the quiet dignity with which I had reclaimed my own life. I had protected myself without becoming bitter. I had established boundaries without building walls that would have forced my grandchildren to choose sides. The next morning, I woke to the sound of a Carolina wren singing its heart out in the dogwood tree outside my window. I made my coffee and took it to the porch, just as I did every morning. I watered the new rose bush, its tiny leaves unfurling in the gentle spring sunshine. I felt a profound, deep-seated contentment. My 72nd birthday was next month, and I was planning my own party, a small dinner with the people who truly mattered. Daniel and his family were driving in. Liam and the children would be there. Susan and my friends from the Arts Foundation and my watercolor class had all joyfully accepted. The irony was not lost on me. Chloe had tried to write the final, diminished chapter of my life. She had planned to shrink my world to the four walls of a single room. Instead, her actions had been the catalyst for an expansion I could never have imagined. I hadn't sought revenge. I had simply chosen to flourish. And in the end, that quiet, determined act of thriving had been the most powerful response of all. As twilight settled over my garden, painting the sky in deepening shades of indigo, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine. The sound of children's laughter drifted up the street. A neighbor waved as she walked her dog. My phone buzzed with messages from friends. This was my victory. Not a dramatic, cinematic triumph, but something far more real and lasting. I had faced down betrayal and, in its place, found a deeper connection to my family, my community, and most importantly, to myself. Chloe had tried to take my future away. Instead, she had inadvertently given me a new one, a future I would author myself, one joyful, purposeful day at a time. The sun slipped below the horizon. Another day was done. And I knew, with a certainty as deep as the roots of the old oaks on my street, that I was ready for whatever came next.